Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, and welcome to the first in our new monthly webinar series, the Landscape Month Ahead, in cooperation with our sister company, AdvocacyStrategy. Thank you very much for taking the time to join us today. This is a new series. It'll be monthly. Each month we'll be taking a look at the month ahead in EU public affairs and provide some advice and insights for how to leverage your time and attention as impactfully as possible. We aim for this to be valuable for all levels of experience, and we look forward to any feedback from you as we take this series forward. So again, this is the first installment, and we really do hope for feedback. Okay, I'm being told I'm not heard. Paul, Alan, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, likewise, I can hear you.
Is anyone else unable to hear me?
No, I think you're good, Michelle.
Okay, I think it's okay. So, moving on then. My name is Michel. Let me just quickly introduce myself. Michel Ehrlich, I'm a co-founder and the CEO of Lanzcape, which is a new app that does something completely innovative. Namely, we provide advocacy advice inside a state-of-the-art monitoring app made mobile first with a free option as well. And this is available now. So don't hesitate to ping me on LinkedIn or by email if you want to know more about that. Today, I'm excited to have two uniquely expert speakers, and they will be our speakers and your speakers moving forward with this series as well. Alan Hardacre and Paul Shotton, who are the co-founders of our partner company, AdvocacyStrategy. They'll introduce themselves. So with that, let me hand this over to Paul.
All right. Thank you very much, Michelle. So indeed, yes, my name is Paul Shotton. I'm half of AdvocacyStrategy alongside Alan Hardacre. And we're an organization that focuses very much on public affairs from the perspective of public affairs management, the practice, the how in public affairs. And so today we wanted to talk to you, let me just move forward a slide. Today we wanted to talk to you a little bit about the key milestones in the coming month for October. So we're going to look a little bit at what are the key institutions of the European Union doing in the coming month. And where we have our interest, we wanted to relate this then back to providing you with some advice about how you might engage with these processes, as well as how you might want to look at structuring your public affairs, something that Alan will talk about a little bit later on. So moving forwards, the first thing maybe to do is just to reflect a little bit upon what have we been doing in September as we transition into October. And from a lot of conversations with other practitioners, many of us have been engaging with the European Parliament as it has come to reconstitute following the elections. We've been engaging with, of course, existing or returning MEPs with existing relationships, but also engaging with the new MEPs and having conversations with them around, of course, the upcoming hearings, as well as the ongoing files, and of course, the potential for new legislation coming in the period. Alongside that, of course, the political guidelines have been out for some time now, as well as the mission letters, which came out around the 17th of September. And these, of course, are essential documents that we'll talk about a little bit more in terms of shaping, of course, the legislative agenda in the coming years. And, of course, shaping your own campaign strategies and plans, and as such, representing key documents for your analysis in the coming period. So I think many of you have already been reflecting upon it, and I've been talking with lots of people about the importance of continuing to look at your priorities in this transitional phase. As the hearings complete and the new work program will be confirmed in the coming months, you will then be able to lock down, of course, you'll be able to lock down your priorities for the coming period, as well as, very importantly, looking at your mapping, something that you're doing now, and of course, something that will be continuing into the October period. So maybe I should stop talking about September. I should start talking about October. And if we take a top-line view, we'll see that in the coming month, the European Parliament will be very active, of course, with a number of plenary sessions, of which, of course, hopefully one session will be looking at taking a final vote confirming the new commissioners. The hearings will hopefully also be taking place. I keep saying hopefully, and we'll talk about that in a moment, should the timing be confirmed. Just a short note about the slides. We'll be sharing these with you, and feel free to explore some of the links. I've included, of course, some information on the processes taking place within the hearings, something that might be of interest to some of you when looking at how the hearings unfold and the rules relating to the submission of questions in particular, as well as the completion of that hearings and the final vote. Some of the legislation and corrections to the legislation are ongoing. We see that process continuing. And of course, there will be an important meeting of the Conference of Presidents, if only to look at the hearings and the timing of the hearings. The Commission, in the meantime, well, they've been busy, of course, in the last month supporting the transition process, focusing on the priorities, the transition into the mission letters. And while that work now is very much focusing on the hearings, the Commission will, of course, need to support that process and support the commissioner candidates in answering and preparing for the hearings. The Council, in the meantime, continues its work with the Eurogroup and the Council meetings, as well as international cooperation summits and some national elections, which we'll touch on. So now I'm going to go look at each of the institutions a little bit more in detail. And like I mentioned before, of course, some of this timing is rather dependent on decisions that will be taken in the next week. Notably this Wednesday, when the Conference of Presidents of the European Parliament is going to decide on Wednesday afternoon the timing of the hearings. So though this isn't a public meeting, I think you should really take a moment to note in your agenda the importance of looking at what is the outcome of that decision. So, very importantly, of course, the Commission now has published the mission letters, which, as you know, are a further elaboration on the priorities of the coming 5 years of the European Commission President, broken down by Commissioner candidate, and of course, representing a much more detailed insight into the priorities and the potential impact of the new European Commission upon your organization. So, of course, the mission letters are something that you need to analyze, you need to understand, you need to adapt to in terms of your communication, and you need to, of course, mobilize your organization around. So the mission letters, of course, are provided to the commissioners and will, of course, frame those commissioners very much so in their work in the coming years. But you should not underestimate, of course, each individual commissioner's ability to provide their own flavor to these portfolios. And as we've seen in the last mandate, some commissioners more than others are prepared to drive forward very specific agendas that they believe in. So the mission letters are something that you need to analyze. And in addition to that, of course, we've talked about the work program, which will be the first articulation of those priorities for the coming year. Now, that process, like we looked at in the last session, is a shortened process in the current year due to the elections. And this process will come to a conclusion with the confirmation and of the new commissioners and their first meetings in the college, where they will discuss and debate and vote upon the work program for the coming year. Now, when that takes place is very much dependent upon the process, and I'll mention that in the next slide, looking at the European Parliament and the process of the hearings and the final confirmation vote, most probably in November or in December, should there be a delay. So to what extent can you, of course, engage with the work program? Well, it's very much in its final stages, as we're talking about now. So it is very much about, of course, intelligence gathering and potentially looking for some of those key issues that may require final adjustment in terms of potential timing and sequencing of proposals in the coming year. Maybe a point to reflect on, in addition to, of course, analyzing the mission letters and understanding their potential impact on your organization's interests and adjusting your prioritization exercises, is to reflect a little bit upon who is within your organization should be aware of these developments. So I think it's good to think about policy officers, technical expertise, and leadership, and how you will communicate developments within the mission letters to those key internal stakeholders. Right, turning to the Parliament then. As we said initially, there will be a plenary session coming at the beginning and at the end of the month, and of course the Commissioner hearings. Now, Annex 7 of the Rules of Procedure, and I'll give you another slide on that in a moment, gives you a lot more detail on that process, and I'll share a little bit more. I myself was interested in that process. And there will, in addition to that, be a decision on the pending files. Now, from my understanding, the Parliament has committed itself to continuing the legislative work on ongoing files in the month of October, but those decisions still need to be taken by the chairs of the committees, and depending upon the timing, they will need to decide and announce that in plenary this month. And of course, there may be some repercussions in terms of the need for new rapporteurs or shadow rapporteurs for some of those files. So what we're seeing taking place, of course, are the hearings in priority, and that's really the priority area of focus. You should, of course, be looking to engage with those MEPs that you have already strong relations with, as well as building new relations with those new cohort of MEPs. You should be trying to attend the hearings. Now, these will be live streamed, so you can also attend them digitally. You can also consider how you would like to transcribe and record these meetings for analysis. And, it is key, of course, that you try and engage with additional members and key players within the committees, namely the coordinators and of course, previous rapporteurs and others. This is all about building a picture of the relationships. It's about mapping your key stakeholders. It's about thinking about gathering feedback into the system as to their positions on your issues, as well as their thoughts about the key files in the coming period. So CRM systems and capturing that information is also very much essential for you as a thought, and maybe we can reflect a little bit more about how you do your mapping and how you capture your interactions with those MEPs in the coming month. A couple of additional notes maybe to mention is that the Committee on Legal Affairs will be looking at the declaration of interest of the commissioners prior to the hearings, signing those off. And like I mentioned, the current timing now seems very ambitious. There have been some delays a little bit with the nomination of the commissioners, and the Conference of Presidents now needs to really reflect on the question of, will the hearings take place on the 14th and 18th of October with a vote at the end of the month, and thus the Commission starting on the 1st of November, able then to discuss and approve the work program, or will this be taking place more in November, early November with the 4th and 12th, and a vote at the end of the month, and therefore a commission starting on the 1st of December. Particularly concern sits around the process of giving enough time to formulate questions and gather those questions within the committees and between the committees and organize that process, which could potentially start within a couple of weeks. So maybe around here as well, you need to think a little bit about your priority asks on the issues. You need to focus, of course, on your mapping of the MEPs, who to engage with, recording their positions, and potentially consider developing profiles for some of those key MEPs. And by profiles, we mean thinking about things such as their policy interests, so their preferences on an individual level, but also on a political level within their political group and their party, their constituency interests, their voting behavior, their memberships of committees, intergroups and other groups and delegations, and potentially also their voting powers. So now may well be the time to start building those profiles on your key MEPs. Like I mentioned, decisions on the pending files should be taking place this month and be announced in plenary, and therefore we'll be able to see the committees taking on that legislative work in the coming months. So a little note on the hearings. I myself was quite interested, so looked into the rules of procedure. There will be, of course, written questions that are being prepared now for the commissioners and submitted to the European Commission, where the services of the European Commission and the Secretariat General will play a key role in formulating the responses, supporting the commissioners in their hearings. And so there will be questions formulated by the Conference of Committee Chairs, but of course, mainly by the specific committees responsible for those policy areas. If multiple committees are involved, we may see the committees sharing those questions, 3 questions each. But fundamentally, that is the key area there. The hearings themselves will last 3 hours, going up to 4 for the complex portfolios, for the vice presidents, for example, and the timing is adjustable. The format itself starts with, of course, an opening statement and then a Q&A. And the political groups will be allocated speaking time based on their size. So each commissioner's responses to written questions will be published on the European Parliament's website. So you must make a note there for collating those responses and analyzing those responses to get an understanding of that position, of course, not only from the Commission themselves, but also from the services. You should also check the committees for deadlines for submission of questions. These can be set by the committees themselves, I believe. And of course, consider your network with the conference of committee chairs if you are interested in trying to shape some of the written questions submitted. Just a note really on what happens after the hearings. Well, after the hearings, the committee coordinators are responsible for formulating one letter of evaluation per commissioner, which once approved at committee level is then passed back through to the Conference of Presidents, who can declare the hearings closed, allow the publication of these letters of evaluation, and then opening the way for the President, von der Leyen in this case, of course, to present her college and her program to the plenary for a vote and adoption, of course, an election of the new Commission. And of course, as we just mentioned, will that process be feasible within the time frame of this month, or will it be pushed into November? Will be determined during the course of this week, and on Wednesday afternoon we should know more. Okay, I'm coming to the end. The Council, a little bit less to be said here in terms of developments. I believe many of the perm reps are continuing their ongoing work on the legislative files that are considered near certain to continue into the coming term. So we have that work continuing. And of course, the presidency, the Hungarian presidency, should become more active on these legislative files in the coming period. It will be somewhat a short presidency, but in terms of legislative work, but we must also turn our attention then to the upcoming trio. We have a trio that's just ending with Hungary, and a new trio starting with Poland and then Denmark and Cyprus that will be starting up work and requiring your attention. So here again, it's about mapping new MEPs, returning MEPs, mapping the new commissioners and their cabinet as they are elected, and of course now mapping new key actors within the upcoming presidencies, and looking potentially into your own national networks and trade associations, business units, if you're a company, looking for those connections with these actors. Maybe worth mentioning, of course, in addition, is there are some elections this month, with Bulgaria at the end of the month and Lithuania with a two-round process during the course of October. So monitoring will be key, of course, with the Council. All right, so that's a little overview of what's coming in the month with our advice. We can maybe take a couple of questions now, or we can, of course, continue through to Alan and take some more questions at the end. I'll see in the chat if anything pops up as well. I think
I see one question. It says, it feels like right now is a key preparation phase and an opportunity to revisit some things I developed in the past. Would this be right?
Yes. Now, with that question, I think we're reflecting here on the question of, especially this is something that Alan will touch upon your preparatory work. So when I talked a lot about your priorities and your mappings and some of these key ingredients of your campaign strategy. So with this transition, indeed, I think there is a lot of focus needed now on using this moment, indeed, to reflect upon continuously and gather information within your organization on your new priorities, and at the same time, focus a lot of your energy on mapping these new actors and stakeholders and their positions as we move forward, because you'll be needing to think about what are your key focus points, your key focus files for the coming year. And, that's a little bit tricky this year because the whole timeline has been compressed now towards the end of the year in terms of what will be in the work program next year. But you can already initiate a lot of that work in the coming period.
Okay, thanks. And yes, of course, Alan, if you want to expand on that later, feel free. Let's see, is that another? Here came another question, two more.
Yeah, I see the question there. Yeah.
You see them?
Yeah, maybe I'll just read them out. I'll read out the first one anyway, but can I elaborate further on the pending files? So from what we understand, I think about 110 plus files have been carried over from the last legislature. And some of these files are at different stages in the process. We have files that are quite advanced, where the first reading or the interinstitutional negotiations have been started, but also a great number of files where in effect the stake has been set in the ground and really just the rapporteurs nominated and work stopped at that stage. So while these files are at different stages, it's my understanding that these files will largely continue unless there are some very major decisions around the legislative proposal no longer being relevant to the external context or being very much misaligned with the current priorities of the new commission. So I think most or all files are expected to continue. And like I mentioned, that decision on those files is expected to take place in the current month with the Conference of Committee Chairs who will be leading that decision making. And of course, if necessary, rapporteurs and shadows will have to be renominated. So for you, it is, I think, a very important question to ask yourself on those files. Was the rapporteur or the shadows, were they re-elected, and where are those gaps potentially? Because you can be quite sure that those gaps, those files will continue, and those gaps will need to be plugged.
Thank you, Paul. Do we have time for another one quickly?
Yeah. I mean, good information. It's a good question, I think, with the profiling. Profiling, of course, you can use the institutional sources and social media in order to get a flavor and an insight into the MEPs and their profiles. Like I said, I think you can get a lot of information on their personal preferences, their party politics, their constituency, and their voting behavior. And then there are some very excellent service providers such as EU Matrix and, of course, Lanzcape, that can give you access to information on them. But EU Matrix also looks into things such as voting patterns. So have a look out there at the different service providers that can give you maybe that additional information on the should we say the characters and the preferences and of course the voting behavior in particular. Feel free to jump in, Alan, if there's anything you want to add at this stage.
Good. What I suggest is then let's move to the next section. There will be more time for questions later. There are still a couple here, but questions that we don't manage to get to within this webinar, we'll try to hit personally later, okay? So don't worry, your questions that you have submitted through the chat are noted. We will try to get back to some of those if there's time at the end. But let me now pass off to you, Alan.
Yes, thank you, Michelle. Good afternoon, everybody. So my name is Alan Hardacre. I'm the second part of Advocacy Strategy, and I'm going to walk you through just a more general piece than what Paul has been talking about, which is to look at some of the things that he's been touching on. So outside of the institutions, what is the internal life of a public affairs professional looking like in October? So the first thing to note there is, of course, the events are starting up. So there's been lots of rentrée, welcome back, what you would call classical visibility events taking place. Politico have been, of course, very busy talking about their own event, as you would expect, but there are plenty of other events taking place. We're also then starting to see the first wave of more issue-related events, and indeed starting to see the first wave of what you would call issue advertorials on Politico and other online spaces. So the more organized amongst us are already trying to shape discussions and debates about what is coming, and that is going to manifest itself in different forms. So I guess here, the main thing is understand where you need to be for the right visibility reasons and the right opportunities in terms of networking to hopefully get to meet some of the existing or the new stakeholders. And also as you try to boost visibility for yourself, your cause or your campaign. And then everything that I'm going to say from this point on is going to come back to structure and process, because as Paul has highlighted in the first part, really this is about the institutions now coming back to life, but not moving fully into legislative mode. It's also about lots of new stakeholders appearing on your radar for the first time. I guess for many of us, when we watch the hearings, it will be the first time we get to see in action some of the commissioner designates. It's probably also the first time that we may get to see some of the new MEPs in action. So it really is a phase of information gathering, intelligence gathering. So that can be following things online. It can be trying to attend events and meet people in person, just all the different ways that we need to be visible and get the right information we need. And this basically is going to be my main slide for what should be happening right now. And I guess here it's a particularly interesting year for public affairs practitioners, because for most people, especially if you're working for, I guess, consultancy or in-house or perhaps even NGOs, round about now is when you are thinking about your 2025 plans, your 2025 budget. And that is, of course, relatively difficult in an EU context at the moment, because it's hard to know what your exact priorities are until you've seen the next work program, for example. So, maybe you have files that are priority, but they're not going to get called out in the 2025 work program. Maybe they get pushed down the line a little bit. So, yes, you should have a moving picture of your priorities, but it has not yet been cemented into some clear timelines. Of course, from that, you would build objectives. That is probably not your focus in the month of October, although if you have clear priorities into your 2025 planning, then it should be part of your focus. However, I think what we believe is really important now in October is really building up the right monitoring support, making sure that you have assessed the changing monitoring landscape, no pun intended, that's going on in Brussels, and that you're getting the information that you need. And of course, there are more forms of information available than there have been in the past. And I think Paul already mentioned organizations like EU Matrix, which will give you very good predictive analytics on committee and plenary votes and positions of all of the MEPs, including the new MEPs. So do you have the right monitoring and information? And that sort of also harks back to, where do you gather information on new and existing MEPs? Obviously, you can do it yourself, but also part of that can be done through dedicated service provision. And then beyond that, as Paul mentioned, you're obviously then going to be building out probably a stakeholder map, and you're going to be looking at some sort of CRM system to gather information from meetings that you're having and from places you're picking stuff up. Do you have the right platform? Did you use an Excel spreadsheet before? Maybe you're looking to upgrade. The reason why we say now is a good time to do it, because obviously by the time we get into November, we're ramping up a little bit more. December, January, maybe we're moving already into the legislative phase, and then it becomes a little bit more challenging for you to do these things in terms of time and commitment. So now is a great time to review what you've got, and I think that goes back to the question that you also asked, Michelle. Yes, now is a very good time to review what are some of these processes, some of the tools you have in, and some of the templates, your timelines, your position paper templates, the assets you're going to use in your engagement. It's a great time to review them and get them ready for rollout as and when you need them. And then I guess, as Paul said, it's about already knowing that there is a sense of direction coming with things like the mission letters, and how do you phase this into some of the templates that you're looking to build. So, and then maybe the other thing that is a big challenge for public affairs professionals right now is, how do you engage your organization or your client around this time of year? Because it's very uncertain, it's very Brussels political, cuisine interne. For most organizations, it's of no material consequence what actually all of this politics, when they're more interested in the file and the consequences of legislation for themselves. So I think now is the time to be building up a communication drumbeat within an organization about what is coming. And how important this is going to be going forward. So it's about making sure that you've got the internal reporting formats right to manage you through this period of uncertainty that you need to communicate in the clearest possible way to once you then get the solid plans coming into place that will then have more impact, allow you to prioritize and engage with your clients and organizations in a much more concrete way. So I guess there's some way of communicating across this. So engaging your organization and reviewing how you communicate internally and externally, because all of this is getting you ready for live files, for when everything starts to kick off and everybody has 43 different priorities and chaos ensues. Just one example of this that Paul was mentioning as he went through the institutions. If you're starting to look at some stakeholder mapping around some issues that you know you're going to face next year, of course, you're filling in some blanks around the MEPs. Their information is obviously very easy to find, but you can, of course, build up better profiles of who they are and what their interests are. So if you have to meet them, you're prepared. Very good. Of course, all of us who follow these things closely will know that when it comes to the European Commission, that has got infinitely more difficult after their extremely strange decision to remove all of their contact information from the EU who is who. So if you know you're going to be working on legislation with the Commission, I think there are two challenges right now. Number one is there's likely to be some restructuring, and I think there is definitely a lot of muted change in the organisation of the Commission. And the second challenge ahead of time is then going to be identifying the relevant people and building up a base of their contact informations, because this will quite frankly take you a little bit of time to do. So just as one example of why this preparation is so important. So if I take the liberty to sort of round off what we have come up with here for October, I guess it's, you know, continued meetings and continued, and even here we can go beyond meetings and sort of monitoring some of the early committee meetings to get a flavour of who these new MEPs are. Monitor the commissioner hearings that are coming up. Watch them if you can. As Paul said, look out for any of the written answers and everything else that goes in the background through the committee websites. Just again, you're getting further nuggets of information about what's going to happen, how things may be addressed. All of that, making sure, you should have done it last month, but we're just checking to make sure, looking at these mission letters, making sure that you've identified what was in it, what wasn't in it, and what that means for you. And then, as I said, looking at a lot of these internal documents, the priorities, your mapping, your CRM, your position papers, and doing some of the preparatory work ahead of time. The more you can do now, the better it is going to be for you going forwards. So I think basically we have summarized that all into an evolving dashboard or checklist, if you like, for October that we've evolved from the one that we produced in September. Don't worry, I'm not going to go through all of this. I'm going to leave it sitting on the screen in the background in case there are any more questions, or whether we move to the questions that were already in the chat, Michelle.
Okay, so why don't we do that then? A couple of great questions from Wim, which we hadn't hit in the first Q&A. So first, have you seen any updated information on, and this is admittedly slightly off topic, but let's try, on how the rules have changed in the EP for event organization? Now, that is not our bread and butter as Lanzcape, and perhaps not yours as AdvocacyStrategy, but perhaps we have heard something about that.
Yeah, all I would say, Michelle, is I have heard that it's changed, but I can't tell you offhand what that change is. If anyone else in the webinar is familiar with this, if you could answer Wim's question, that would be great. It is changing. I can't tell you exactly what it is, unfortunately.
Yeah, so if anybody knows something, raise your hand, and I think I should be able to turn on your mic. We'll see.
Unless you have stumped everybody, Wim, with your question, which it looks like you might have done.
It's easy enough to research, so we'll get someone on that. We'll deliver an answer to you, Wim. And there was another question. This is perhaps a little bit easier. How do you perceive, and this is super interesting actually, how do you perceive the influence of past chairs / rapporteurs on committees and files? as we transition and as some files still need to have rapporteurs assigned?
I can take a first answer, and then Paul can add in if he wants. I think obviously the first thing, when you say past rapporteurs, it's as we transition over, it's very unusual that somebody who was a rapporteur in the previous legislature would not be the rapporteur going forwards. So that would be the first comment. Normally rapporteurs would continue unless they've had a complete change of heart and they want to join a different committee, which tends not to happen, but never say never. Otherwise, yes, of course, past chairs, past rapporteurs. I guess you're moving Wim into a category of what you would call kind of serious heavyweight MEPs who've got some experience. They know the files, they know the politics, they know the committees. So clearly, yes, they have a big influence. Of course, we all know that there are certain positions within a committee that are influential. Yeah, so you're the coordinator, you're the rapporteur, you're the shadow, up to the chair. But you also have a category of MEPs who wield influence by virtue of their experience. So I think those MEPs are clearly critical for all files in different committees. So yeah, they should form part of any good mapping, any good outreach, never to be ignored. I don't know, Paul, if that leaves you any room for anything to add on that.
Yeah, there are two things that could come to mind are maybe the state of advancement of the file prior to the elections. So the less advanced the file, then the less opportunity there has been to frame the discussions within the parliament as to what needs to go in the report. So the window of opportunity, should we say, is the largest. And therefore, on the flip side, the files that are quite advanced, well, by the nature of their progress through the legislative process, of course, we see that window narrowing and the focus turning on the more divisive issues. And then potentially, of course, some of the shifts that have happened in terms of the voting and the number of votes distributed within amongst political groups within the party, within the committees. So, of course, seeing the rise of the right-wing parties and maybe the reduction of the Liberals to a degree within the committees may well have an impact on the dynamics, anyway, within the committee on the file.
Great. Thanks
and on
for that.
A side note,
yep.
I Googled the rules governing the participation of interest representatives in events held on the Parliament's premises, and you can find a decision from June 23 that I haven't checked, but that might be the most recent decision that outlines those rules, and I can always share them in the chat, and we can also, of course, look to find more recent amendments to those rules in case there was something more recently in 24.
Okay, great. I think we have time for one more question. We have 5 minutes left in the allotted time. And there's a very interesting one here, which I would love to hear more on. And it's the following. I find it difficult to engage my internal organization right now, or at least to give them actionable information as opposed to political gossip. How do I get this right? Alan, that sounds like your wheelhouse.
Yeah, no, look, I mean, that I can do this. This is almost an unfortunate challenge for many public affairs people right now as they look at 2025 planning, and the EU is very political right now. It is not very legislative. And most organizations are, of course, impacted and interested in the legislative. That's not to say the political isn't important, but it's not directly meaningful for them. So I think that there really is a challenge, and I guess the best way to do it is to milestone and stage gate that this political period is moving towards the legislative period with potentially the following files of impact for an organization. So I think it's about the constant need to tell your internal public affairs story. And as long as you have some of those longer term pieces, these are the files that could impact, my client or my organization. These are some of the potential impacts that can keep organizations interested. But yes, I can sympathize with that challenge right now. And it does you no service to fall into the political gossip. So I think it's really stay fixed on what some of the potential impacts are going to be and take them on the journey through this stage with you is what I would advise.
Great. Thank you. So last call for questions. Otherwise, we'll start wrapping up. It's great to make good time. We're all busy. Okay, great. So just a couple of housekeeping remarks then to finish up. We will be, after this, we'll be sending the recording. I think that may happen automatically, but I'll make sure of that. We'll send the recording of the entire webinar. So that includes the slides and the sound and everything else. And we can also send the deck itself as well. Now, as mentioned at the beginning, we want to make this a series, and we're aiming for round about the last Monday of each month, although that will be adjusted as per holidays and other constraints. We're looking at the 4th of October, sorry, the 4th of November for the next one, at 1 p.m. So that'll be our favored time slot. I think it works well. So 4th November, 1 p.m., mark your calendars. We will announce it on LinkedIn, etc., as usual. And if anyone has remarks, feedback on this one, or things you would like us to cover in the next one, please share that with us. We want these sessions to be as valuable as possible and as helpful as possible, and input and feedback and commentary from you is valuable to that end. So with that, I would like to thank you all very much for joining us today, for taking the time, and hope to see you again next month. Thank you also, Alan and Paul, for this expert webinar, and looking forward to working with you again next month on that as well.
Thanks, Michelle. Thanks, everybody. Have a good week.
Thank you. Have a good week.